In today's tutorial, we're going to be making a really cheeky, really cute meerkat. My name is Charlotte Allen and you've reached my channel, The Felting Alchemist. So I had an order to make a meerkat, and it's quite a special meerkat because it was somebody that I know, and her little boy had this soft toy meerkat, and they went on holiday and it was his favourite toy in the whole wide world, and he lost it, bless him, and they wanted to find some kind of replacement that he could kind of treasure forever. So they asked me to make him a meerkat. So I thought I would take the opportunity to make a tutorial for you guys so you can see exactly how I make this meerkat. So this is Mr. Meerkat here. We're going to be making him. So he's on a wire armature, so you can bend his arms and he can wave. He can kind of do his little kind of like meerkat kind of arm stance when they're kind of, you know, waiting for kind of prey to try and get them and run away. His tail's all bendable as well, and I've added lots of colour layers onto him as well to make him look lovely and authentic, but still keeping that really cheeky, cute look. So let's see what materials you're going to need to make this really sweet little meerkat. Materials wise for this tutorial, you're going to be needing around about sort of 10 to 12 grams of a white core wool. I'm using a white Shetland here, but you can use any core wool you want to. You're also going to need about 8 grams of a light brown coloured wool bat. So I've got a Corridale here and it's in this kind of almost beigey kind of colour. So you want to aim for this kind of colour because this is going to be the majority of the meerkat's body. You're going to want about 5 grams of a more darker brown wool bat. So I haven't gone too dark here because this is going to be to go around his eyes and his hands. So nothing too drastic. You can go darker if you want to, but you do want to have a contrast with the black. So I would go for this kind of a brown, so kind of a mid brown, so it still stands out against the beige colour without being too dark. And finally, you're going to need some black wool bats as well, and this is going to be to make his eyes and his nose. In addition to that, you're going to need 3 floristry wires. So these are 31 centimetres randomly in length, and they're about 18 gauge in terms of their thickness. I buy mine on eBay. You can buy them on Amazon, eBay, anywhere online. They're dirt cheap and they're really great because they've got lots of bendability without snapping. So I'm going to be using these to make his armature. Tools wise, you're going to need a felting mat to do your felting on. You're going to need some wire snips. So these are just really cheap jewellery cutters that I bought in a little bead shop that's local to me. You're also going to need a tape measure to help you measure out certain parts of the sculpture to get it all in proportion. You're going to need some small embroidery scissors, some felting wax, and this is one I make myself and sell in my online shop on Etsy. And then needles wise, I'm going to be using medium twisted needles and then some fine twisted needles as well. I've got 2 in needle felting pens just to speed up the process for me, but you can just use a singular needle if you want to. And then finally, I've got my medium twisted cross star needle, and this is going to be for doing more of the detailed work later on and adding things in like his mouth and his eyes. Last but by no means least, I've got my brush mat here and I've got my 7 needle multi-tool, and we're going to be using these to make sections of the meerkat and build it up and create his shape and his form. And inside my multi-tool, I've got 7 fine triangular needles there. So let's start part 1 of this tutorial. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of our floristry wires, we're going to fold it in half, and we're going to twist the top where we've bent it. So we've got about ½ an inch there of twisted wire, and we're going to put that to one side. Next, you're going to take your second floristry wire and we're going to fold that in half as well. And this time, rather than twisting it, we're going to place that fold where we folded it in half and place it underneath where his neck would be, and then take the front and the back wires and twist them together for 4 turns. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then the same on the other side. And I have an armature tutorial on my channel if you want to know how to do this in more detail. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to fold over those 2 back pieces and create this kind of triangular shape, and then twist the 2 wires together until we've got quite a nice long torso, or what will be his torso once he's finished. So I'm just going to go around for another twist. So we'll take measurements in a moment, but it's probably about sort of 3½ inches in length at the moment, his torso. So I'm just going to straighten him out, and I'm just going to bend his arms up a little bit just to have a rough idea of where I want the overall length of his arms to be when he's finished. But this is a bit of a movable feast at the moment and it can change. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to fold up his feet. So I'm going to take his little legs and I'm just going to fold up probably about an inch. About an inch I'm going to fold up, and that's going to create his nice long feet, because meerkats do have lovely long feet. And then I'm going to fold over those ends there, so you don't have any horrible sharp pointy bits to spike you in the finger. Ouch, that is not fun at all. So I've done that first foot. I'm just going to hold it against the second foot, and then I'm going to fold over that second foot and make sure I've got it exactly the same length, because we don't want one foot longer than the other, because then he'll look a bit odd. So I'm just going to bend those into place. And then I'm just going to bend his arms up a bit higher, because now that I've bent his feet into position, I know that his arms are too long where I initially bent them. So I'm just going to bend them again into position. And then I'm going to take my wire cutters and I'm just going to snip where I've bent, but I'm going to leave about 1 centimetre, and that's to fold up. And then I'm just going to fold up that little centimetre there that I've left spare. I'm going to fold that up again just to get rid of any sharp edges on the final sculpture. So this can be a bit tricky sometimes to do it with your fingers, so you might find it's easier to use a pair of pliers, but I like to make life difficult for myself and just use my fingers, but pliers are definitely easier when you're bending the wire up. Okay, so we're starting to look a little bit like a little person at the moment. His legs are kind of bent into position roughly, but the next thing we need to do to make him stable is add his tail. So I'm going to fold my second piece or my third piece of floristry wire, and then I'm just going to take it and I'm going to start folding it about halfway down the torso. I'm going to twist it round that body there. And once I've folded around the first piece, I'm then just going to take off the excess. I'm just going to fold that little bit up there. Just going to fold this round just to give a bit more security. And there you go. So that is your wire armature completed. So I'm just going to do some measurements for you now so you can see roughly how big he is. So his arms are just over 3 inches in length. His torso from the top of his shoulders is just over 2 inches in length, almost 2.5 inches. His legs are, let's get the tape measure into place. So his leg is measuring to the ankle about 3 inches in length, and then his foot is measuring about 1/2 inch there or thereabouts. His tail, I'm just going to straighten it out a second so you can get a truer idea of the length, is 4.5 inches, and then finally his head, where his head is going to be, is measuring about 1 inch, just under 1 inch. So the next thing I'm going to do is just cover this all in felting wax, because it can be a bit slippery sometimes. So I just want to make sure that there's enough stick there so that the wool isn't going to come away. Then I've got my core wool here. I've got a long strip. Try and get as long a strip as you can, because we're going to do this 3 times now. So we're going to fold this all the way down the leg nice and tightly, being cautious that it doesn't twist. We definitely don't want this to twist. So take your time with it. Be very gentle as you bring it over again, because what will happen is, because the wool's very delicate, it will tear and then you'll lose that length. So try and, when you're folding it over, keep your fingers as close to the wool and the wire as possible to stop that from happening. So we're going to take it all the way down to the foot, going past the wire on the foot, and then we're going to go back up again. And we want to really start creating some shape to his legs here by using the cool wool before we actually start using the brown wool and adding the colour later on. So we want to use our cheaper wools to create the shape, and it just makes it more cost effective then for us when we're making sculptures. So I'm going to take this wool all the way back up to the top of where his bottom is. And then once I've reached the top, being sure to keep everything nice and straight and taut, I'm then going to take it back down again, back down the leg. So I'm just going to untwist it here. You can see how easy it is for this wool to twist around. So it's really important that you keep checking, because if it was to twist around, you get a really uneven finish to your leg, and that's going to have a real impact on the final sculpture as well. So you really want to make sure that it's nice and straight as you're twisting it round. And then back again past the wire on the foot, and then back up again towards the kind of very top of his tail. Just keeping it nice and taut, keeping the fingers really lovely and close. And once I get to the end of the wool, I'm just going to hold it down, and I'm just going to felt down those ends so it doesn't unravel. And I'm just using my fine needles to do this, my fine twisted needles. So you want to get to a stage where your legs are looking roughly like this, and I'm just going to bend it into position for you now so you can see roughly what kind of shape we're aiming for with the sculpture. And then once that's bent in, we're going to do exactly the same thing with the second leg, so eventually it looks like this. So you've got 2 legs here covered. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some more layers of wool. So I'm going to take another shorter piece and I'm going to take it all the way down to the ankle this time, and then just tack that in, and then do the same thing on the other side. And then I'm going to take another piece, a third piece, and I'm going to wrap it around his thigh this time. So I'm not going down to the what would be the calf of the leg, I'm just going up to the thigh. So sort of just where the knee is, I'm taking the wool down to, and then back up again. And we're doing this just to create that extra bulk, that extra thickness. Because if you look at a meerkat, they tend to have these kind of very thick thighs where they do lots of running. So eventually your meerkat should look like this. So the next thing I want to do is take another long strip of my white Shetland wool and I'm going to wrap it around his torso. So again, you want to keep this really taut. Taking your time to wrap it round all the way up to what would be his armpits, and then we're going to go over one shoulder, then back all the way around the body, and then over the second shoulder. So it's almost like we're creating this kind of shawl-like appearance to him, and then I'm just giving it a tug there to make sure it's nice and taut. Then back over the first shoulder, back around the body again, and then back round that second shoulder, the shoulder nearest to me, and then back round the body again. And then I'm just going to take the rest of that wool down to the torso, down the bottom of the torso again, all the way down until I get to those loose fibres, and I'm just going to then tack those into place onto the sculpture. Again, just using my fine twisted needles, and just be really careful. I always say this in my tutorials, but just be really careful with your needles here because you've got a lot of wire you can hit and it would be really easy to break them. So just be careful. So I'm just going to give this a good old felt now and get it looking nice and neat. Get rid of any lumps and bumps, make it look nice and lovely and smooth. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a section of wool and we're going to divide it in half and we're going to wrap his arms. So you should have 2 equal pieces of wool here. I'm just going to get a bit of felting wax on my finger, rub it between my finger and my thumb, and then I'm just going to wrap in exactly the same way that we wrapped his leg earlier on, wrap around his arm. And I'm going to take the wool all the way down past the end of the wire where his hand would be. Don't worry if it doesn't cover the wire completely at the moment because we're going to add a lot more layers to this as we progress the tutorial, so don't worry too much if you don't cover the entire hand. All the way back to the top again, and then I'm just going to fold that round a few times down to the kind of what would be the bicep, and then back up, and then I'm just going to twist that round his neck just as it's a good anchor point, and then felt that down. And then do exactly the same thing on the other arm. So you should eventually have both arms looking exactly the same. So something like this. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap his neck. So I'm going to take another piece of my white Shetland and just wrap that around his neck. And I want to get it relatively thick because we're going to be adding some additional pieces later on to create the shape of his head. And I want to have a good anchor point to add those pieces to. And I'm just going to measure his torso a second. So his torso is 2.5 inches in length. So the next stage is we're going to be making some panels to add to his body, and we want them to be around that size. That's the kind of the maximum size that we need to make in terms of the length of the pieces. So I've got some more white Shetland here and I'm just layering it on top of each other to get a nice sort of relatively thick piece, not too thick because we don't want them to be too bulky because they tend to be quite sort of slender, slim animals, meerkats, all the running they do, running away from the birds of prey and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just placing that onto my brush mat, and then I've got my 7 needle multi-tool and I'm just going to felt that down flat onto the brush mat initially. And I'm just going to keep felting until the majority of the piece has been felted down, and then I'm going to bring up the loose fibres on one side and I'm just going to felt those down so I've got a nice straight edge, and we're going to create a rectangle shape. Just felt that part down there and then just bring in the other side and felt that down as well. So I've got 2 straight edges, and then I'm just going to fold in those other loose ends there by about 1/2 inch. Just mind your fingers as you're doing this. Don't for goodness sake stab yourself with a multi-tool, because you'll have 7 felting injuries instead of just the 1, which will be really bad. So that's the piece finished. I'm just going to measure the length. So it's measuring 2.5 inches in length, this piece. So let's move on to the second piece. I'm going to make a second piece now, and this piece is going to be slightly shorter than the first piece we made, and we're going to do something different with this. We're going to angle the top part. So I'm going to make this kind of triangular shape with this next piece. So I'm just folding those sort of top ends over, and then I'm going to fold that bottom piece up there as well. And this is going to sit where his kind of rib cage would be. It's going to give that impression that he's got his rib cage there and his belly's kind of sticking out a little bit, protruding ever so slightly. So it should look like this roughly, and it's 2 inches in length, that one. And then width-wise, it's about 2 inches. Don't worry too much if the width is a bit different, because that doesn't matter too much with this tutorial. It's more about the length than anything in relation to getting the right lengths. So we're making a third piece now. This is going to be his bottom. So I've taken quite a thick amount of wool here. I've probably got about 6 layers of wool, 6 to 8 layers of wool. And I'm just folding up one side this time. And then finally, I've got my last piece, which is nice and long. So my brush mat is about 5.5 inches in length. So this is probably going to be about 8 inches, this piece. And I'm just felting down all of the length of it. And then I'm going to fold one side up to get a nice straight edge. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, just folding those loose fibres over. So we've got this nice straight piece that we can then add to what will be his head later on. I'm just going to fold over those ends as well. So this piece is measuring 7.5 inches in length. And then I'm going to make another piece for the head, which is his kind of the top half, which is going to give us again another anchor point to add additional pieces to later. So this is a circular piece. So I'm just using my fingers to bring in those loose fibres to create a circular piece that's 2 inches in diameter. Okay. Again, it doesn't matter too much if it's not perfectly symmetrical. So I'm going to take that first piece that we made and I'm going to place it over his chest all the way down to his torso, so it meets just about where his legs start. And I'm going to felt that into position with my fine twisted needles. So again, take your time with this because we've still got lots of wire that we can hit and you don't want to break your needles. Always when you're using your needles, you want to make sure that you come out in the same direction that you go in. Never bend your needles because that's a surefire way to break them and it gets very expensive. So what I'm doing here is I'm just folding over those loose pieces around the side of the body and bringing them round, and then just felting everything under his arms and round his shoulders. And then doing the same thing on the other side, getting it nice and secure. And then just over the shoulders again. That's a really important area to get nice and smooth because you don't want any additional bulk there really. So that's the first piece added. Then we're going to add the second piece. Now this piece is going to go, like I said, just under where his rib cage would be roughly. So you've got that triangular piece going underneath there. And again, I'm just going to felt into the tops of the legs now just to add a bit of extra bulk. So I'm using my medium needles this time just to give myself a bit more felting power, and it doesn't matter too much about indentations at this stage because we're going to be adding additional layers later on when we add our colour to our meerkat. So I'm just going to turn him round and I'm just going to make sure that I'm really making the most of that triangular shape and just felting that down even more so that when we add our brown later on, that's going to really come through and add a nice additional feature to him. So really make sure that you work around those areas like the legs to get a nice smooth finish so everything looks nice and cohesive and you haven't got any clear joins or anything like that. So I'm just going to go around his body, any loose areas, I'm just going to give it a felt down, but don't go too crazy. We don't want anything too firm. Next, I'm going to take my head wrap. I'm going to start off by just taking a small piece and wrapping it over the entire head, or sort of the neck area, I guess, and using my medium needles just to felt that into position. And once that's felted down and it's nice and secure, I'm then going to wrap that additional length around the rest of his head in the opposite direction. And then again, take my medium needles and just felt down that loose piece and get a nice smooth finish again. We really want to integrate that, that piece that we've wrapped round into the rest of the wrap so that we get a nice smooth surface, so that when we add our other wraps later and our other pieces, everything looks nice and symmetrical. So I'm just making sure that I'm really felting around that neck area. So you should have something that looks like this. And then we're going to take that top part that we made for his head, I'm going to place it on top, and I'm going to felt that down. It's a bit tricky initially to get it anchored down, so I'm just going to hold him upright and just do a few stabs initially just so that it doesn't come off. And once I've anchored it down a little bit, just be careful of your fingers here. Felting gloves are always good to use. I'm just going to lie him down now because he's all anchored into position, and felt that around his head. Just take your time with this. And it doesn't have to be particularly pretty, but you do want it to be nice and smooth. Next, I'm going to take his bottom piece. So you want to have the straight side going downwards. I'm going to take my embroidery scissors and I'm going to cut a little snip just at the bottom, right in the middle of the piece, so that we can allow for his tail to go through. So I'm just going to cut about 1 inch, feed his tail through that gap, and then I'm just going to felt that down into place. So we're creating more bulk around that bottom area of our meerkat. Still using my medium needles. Just go careful of that wire around the tail as well as it's sticking out. You don't want to end up, again, sort of hitting it and breaking your needles. And you really want to focus on getting a nice smooth finish again all the way around those thighs. The thighs are really important. You don't want to end up with loads of bulkiness and lumpiness because it will take away from the professionalism of the overall sculpture. So really focus on getting a nice smooth finish when you're integrating additional pieces into those thighs. So I'm just going to speed things up for you now. Now you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to fold those sides round, and then again, I'm just going to felt those sides round into the torso and the leg, all those loose fibres, so we get a nice smooth finish. It can take a little bit of time to do. This sculpture in sort of total, it took me about 3.5, 4 hours to make. So it's not a quick sculpture, but it does, you know, it's very satisfying once you've finished it. You've got this kind of really cute looking meerkat from just a pile of wool. I mean, what's more satisfying than that? You know, you tell me. Maybe a bottle of wine, that could be more satisfying. It depends on what, you know, what floats your boat, I guess. So I'm just felting around that bottom half again, getting rid of any looseness, making sure I get rid of any little air pockets and things like that. And just felting around his torso, giving him a bit of a tidy up now. He reminds me, at this stage, he's starting to remind me a little bit of like a faun from Narnia. Oh, that's a good one to do. Maybe I should do a Narnian faun next. That could be quite a fun make to do. I really do love all those old children's classics like the Chronicles of Narnia and all the Roald Dahl novels as well. They're great fun. So maybe I should do a Mr. Tumnus next. That would be quite good, especially as we're approaching Christmas as well. He could have his little umbrella and his little pile of parcels. Oh yeah, that's definitely up my street. I think I'm definitely going to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to continue to give him a bit of a tidy up and a felt round. And you can see here that his bottom's looking a bit flat, so I'm going to add a bit of additional bulk to it. So I'm going to make another piece, another round piece that I'm going to make quite thick. I'm just going to use my multi-tool to felt that down onto my brush mat, and it's probably the same size as that headpiece we made earlier. It's about 2 inches in diameter, and I'm just going to again cut about 1/2 inch or maybe about 1 inch into the centre of that piece, or in the sort of the middle piece. There we go, so it's 2 inches, and then again I'm just going to feed that around the tail, and then I'm just going to felt that down into place again. Because we want to add shape to him. We don't want to have anything linear looking because it takes away from the overall sort of interest of the piece. So we really want to make sure that we're adding lots of different layers and what's the word I'm looking for? Lumps and bumps, I guess. Okay, so he's looking a bit more fuller now in his figure. So the final thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap his tail. So I'm just going to initially just anchor that down, that first piece down into the back of his bottom. And once it's all anchored into place, I'm just going to start folding around the core wall all the way down to the end of the wire, past the wire, around his tail all the way up, and then all the way back down again to his bottom, where I'm then going to just felt down those loose pieces and anchor them into position. And there we go, that is the very first half of the tutorial complete. So I hope you found that easy to follow. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I will see you tomorrow with the second part. See you then, have a great day, bye.